United States of Lead is an informative podcast that may contain sensitive material and the occasional F-bomb. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the United States of Lead, a podcast about crime, mental decline, and the lead thread that links them. This week, we are going to briefly discuss the history of lead in makeup. And spoiler alert, there is still lead in makeup today. Not that anybody should be surprised. But I also just wanted to briefly touch on some of the current events, which I guess won't be so current by the time this airs. But at the time of our recording, some Supreme Court decisions. And one I want to highlight is the rollback of the EPA regulations that the Supreme Court just ruled, because we touch on this in the timeline, the 2017 timeline of Trump.
Yeah.
And the setup of the dominoes to make all this happen. So we just want to briefly bring notice to that. This is obviously, if you think this is just something that happened, it's been in the playbook and a part of a plan for a long time. And that has inspired us to dive a little bit deeper into the cult of corporations on a spinoff, which will be coming soon. For those who like our content, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon at United States of Lead. I got into a little bit of a rabbit hole just trying to find a simple timeline of events for particular people in current events. And it led to some obvious yet shocking information that I think we need to share with everyone.
I also just wanted to say, I appreciate these off-kilter mentions. So like we put out this podcast and then it takes time, or we make it and then it takes time for editing and then it comes out. It's not coming out the moment that we finish talking. But what I really appreciate about this is when it does come out, we have an opportunity to kind of offer these little glimpses of a couple weeks ago. And I think right now it's kind of difficult to keep all of the crazy in mind.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And when we looked at the timeline of acts under the Trump administration, it's like, oh, remember this, remember this, remember this, remember. No, I don't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just
why it's important to go back on it. I think that'll be a good reminder for everyone to see the inner workings, because the interesting thing, is as much as Trump is an egomaniac, narcissist, corrupt person, the focus on this being him and only him as like this mastermind is also deflection that people really need to pay attention to. Like, yes, is he as shady as everybody believes? And does he deserve to pay the consequences of his actions? Absolutely. But if you think like it's like, oh, we just need to lock Trump up and then we can like move on with our lives, you're sorely mistaken.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I was excited to hear about this side project or this idea that you had, because one dynamic in the logistics of the structures of cults is a relationship to power. I think oftentimes a cult or some of these extreme religious practices are a better lens or a better form to examine corporate structures and political structures and cultural structures than they are like church structures or other religious faiths. Sometimes religion it doesn't always fit so well with religion. It actually fits better with these unconventional and secular, seemingly secular corporations. Why are people allowing these things to happen? Why are we allowing these harmful rituals, these like hazing rituals or these
kidnapping people?
Even something as simple as pay. How pay is determined and worthiness is determined. It's
like Scientology, like you have to pay to get to a certain like status.
And how you have to have a certain status in a community that's undefined, which is not unlike you're getting your salary increased or something like that. Like someone else knows the rules, but it's just because they're in the in group. That's cult like behavior.
And also, I think people forget that Christianity was a cult, considered
it's the most successful cult in history.
If you look back at history and like what happened there, I mean, I'm somebody who was raised Catholic. And the other thing is like people hear that and then they automatically feel attacked. And it's not attacking your religion if you actually walk in the footsteps of Christ and not use the name Christ to get away with some really evil, corrupt stuff. That's different. Like Christ would never have done any of the things that a lot of these people who claim to be Christian use the word Christian to get away with. Jesus was a pretty chill hippie. Anyways, back to lead in makeup. From Wikipedia, quote, the practice of deliberate skin lightening initially began in ancient Rome, where lead carbonate was used as a cosmetic product to whiten skin. Light skin was thought to be a symbol of femininity, and beauty ideals during the time favored clarity of individual skin, which, I mean, I'm pretty sure like clarity of skin is still favored. I don't know if that like went away. You know what I mean? So lead carbonate was also used throughout ancient Egypt and Greece as a white cosmetic, and it was known as cerussa. The basic ingredient of this was white lead, and it was used by Roman women to cover blemishes and enhance skin color. The Egyptians used lead sulfide in kohl, or application is typically found around the eye, which, good Lord. You know, we've been expanding our lifespans throughout the ages. And it's like, how much of this was just like people just constantly being poisoned, and that's why they died so early.
Yeah.
So you might be wondering, well, how is this stuff made? According to Wikipedia, quote, the process of manufacturing Venetian ceruse. So this is once it got to Italy. So that they kind of ignore the fact that there's like a timeline of this where they continue to enhance and improve the lead makeup, you know, because it's just working so well. The process of manufacturing Venetian ceruse involved carefully placing lead sheets into clay pots, partially filled with vinegar. The pots were then sealed with lead lids or packed straw and kept aside for several weeks, allowing the lead acetate to form and produce lead carbonate, once eventually exposed to air, end quote. And so, yeah, like I just said, other versions of leaded makeup predate this time, but this was, I feel like it's like when it was most notable.
Well, in the process,
you know what I mean?
Something I think historians wish that people had more of are the technical manuals for how to do things. Like people wrote, and then we made ceruse, like as if everyone knows what that is. And so I'm sure, Venice isn't that old. Certainly, they probably had the technical manual, and that's why they're able to quote from this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the process of making it.
It's just, and also just how fucking gross it sounds. Vinegar. Like, did that shit just smell horrific and you're rubbing it all over your face? I really want to know what it smelled like.
I feel like one aspect of time travel movies that no one talks about is like if you go too far in the future, you're susceptible to just random diseases. Nobody ever. You go 150 years in the future, you're dead in minutes because of the common cold at that point. And then if you go too far in the past, really stank.
Yeah, it was just really
unbelievably stinky.
Yeah, they never bring that up.
They never bring that up. It's not like like the comic relief steps in something. It's all the
Yeah.
time. There's nothing
That's
but stepping in something. Anyway,
that's why I liked Deadwood. Like they looked
yes,
stinky, you
yes,
know?
yeah. All those love scenes. There's a little bit
Oh
of poop in
God,
the air.
stop. Anyways, back to leaded makeup. So going back to the idea of when this really, because to me, I don't necessarily associate this with ancient Rome, but I knew they used it in makeup, like they used it in everything. But when I think of this like white makeup, I always think of the people with the powdered wigs. But going back to Wikipedia quote, the ideal beauty standards during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance saw women aiming to achieve a white complexion contrasted by bright red cheeks and lips. The complexion many women strived towards was that of a quote, bright as moonlight or quote, fair as snow, end quote. And I love this because like I just think of like being sickly. You know, like you always see those jokes of the sickly Victorian child memes. I don't know if you ever see those online.
Oh no, for
but
sure.
but like that was somehow to show that you were healthy. And then that's, you know, I mean, talk about how we use makeup just in general to mask imperfections, right? These people are trying to mask their sickness, but ironically making themselves more sick. It's important to note too, though, that this makeup was obviously used by both genders. So, I mean, were women probably getting a hell of a lot more sick because I mean, they were just full of it, not just like with their makeup, but you know, what they then were prescribed. And like I said, like they continue to put more on because they feel like they need to cover up the imperfections, even though what's causing a lot of it is what they're putting on their face. So also too, it made me think like, you know, when you see comedy sketches from like the 16th century and it's all like you know, and they always sound so crazy.
Sure.
Like, like I think of like, God, what was that SNL sketch with the guy from Kids in the Hall? It went on for so long. Do you remember where they're dressed in their powdered wigs and
Okay.
they're the two guys who are constantly laughing and they like, oh fuck, I'm gonna have
Okay.
to find it. But anyways, it made me think of our discussion with the powdered wigs and how the powder in these powdered wigs was also just nothing but powdered lead. So like they're rubbing it on their faces. They're putting it on their heads. I mean, I even think of the movie Amadeus
Mm-hmm.
and you know how Mozart's crazy and has that crazy laugh like that's associated with that time. And it's like, were they all just fucking psychotic from lead?
I think that's one of the things that we're exploring is that this notion of lead poisoning and lead affecting our day-to-day world, our centers, and particularly our centers of power, is, but it could really be a factor. It could really be part of why things are messed up. Is that because what we're discussing here? These are the people that could afford makeup. Like, so the blacksmith's wife was not, who would have been a pretty well-off person in a village, right? So this is a tradesperson's wife.
Yeah.
They weren't.
She wasn't. Yeah.
She weren't caking it on every day before milking the cow.
There might be one outlier out there that was able.
Right. She just needed it before, to take out the garbage, which was all around them. Because again, it really
was stinky.
These are the haves. These are the well-offs, the people who are writing history and that we have.
And again, going back to ancient Rome, you know, like that, it was a social status thing. Obviously, were people getting poisoned by the water? Yeah. But like the amount of it. And then we talk about this a little bit later, but the concept of poisoning itself and that people like hear the word like getting poisoned and it's like this idea that it's like this boom, okay, you're done. Like out of a movie where like you drink the poisoned wine and then, oh, you're dead. And like a lot of the poisoning that we experience isn't something that you can even notice is happening to you. Because a lot of it are these effects like nausea, headaches, and irritability. You know,
it's not something that we're set up to explore. So, I mean, like with the difficulty of getting a test and the rampantness of lead everywhere, I think one of the things that we've been saying is it should be a more present part of our everyday discussions, or like how do we start a renovation? How do we get a
Mm-hmm.
new apartment complex? And like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have like lead testing ever. Like, all right, I just moved in, so we test, and then
Or
after
every three
some
years.
after some use of this apartment, and we've kicked
Mm-hmm.
up the dust, and we've moved things, and we've hung
Mm-hmm.
things, and then it's like, okay, should I test when do I test again? When do I just went through this and this and this, when do I test again? We
Mm-hmm.
don't have that, even though lead is everywhere. So
The only way we have it is if you have a child, they get tested, they find it, they make the connection of that, and then you go back in 6 months and get tested again. But like I said, once that happens, if the elevation continues, then your option is to move. And then
mhm.
somebody else moves into that place, gets lead poisoning. Like there's no actual fix, if you will, that seems to be happening. I don't understand why every 3 years you can't get your lead level tested and have an actual number, something you could be using every day. It might not be a lot of lead, but it accumulates in your body.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to get to. Only 25% of like the disease and cancer that is in our society is genetically marked. It's lifestyle and environmental. And the scary thing, like we said, brought up earlier with the EPA regulations being lifted, we were on a good trajectory of lowering cancer and disease. And that's not going to get better
hmm
the more that these regulations get lifted.
When I was a kid, in school we were talking about some survival business, and I thought, so like if someone went overboard, growing up in Minnesota, it was like if someone goes overboard and they're in the ocean, I thought, why don't they just swim back to shore? It might take days and days and days, but why
Uh-huh.
don't they just swim back to shore? The reality is there's huge currents of
Mm-hmm.
water that even if you were swimming as fast as you could, you might
Mm-hmm.
even traverse hundreds of miles, but you're only traversing within this current. And
Yeah.
of course, I know you know this, but I just like that was a huge aha moment where it's like, oh, I can actually do a lot of energy. I can spend a lot of energy in my little sphere.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to articulate this, of course, when I was a kid, but it's like, oh, I can do a lot of stuff in my little sphere. But there's a whole chunk of something that's moving that I can't really escape. That's the
And
scary
some
thing
people
with
can't
lead.
swim.
Right. So there's
And then there's those people who just never were taught to swim.
and there's some people that can swim really well, but you're never gonna swim well enough to escape the current.
Yeah,
You're never
yeah.
gonna like
Yeah, you can do your best, but
you can't get out of this.
going back to Ferris snow look, according to Wikipedia quote, during the Middle Ages, individuals had little access to effective medicine for treatment of many of the diseases that were rampant at the time. So, like we said, having clear skin from blemishes was therefore highly sought after and considered to be a social indicator of an individual's good health and fertility for women, end quote. And so I think about the fact that lead is associated with infertility and how much of a mind fuck that must have been for women at that time, and then being shamed for not being able to have children. Like, well, you're not a woman if you can't bear a baby. Also, too, I want to note that there's debate as to whether or not Queen Elizabeth wore leaded makeup. A lot of sources say she did, and then there's some that say she didn't. But given the side effects that she had, there is a good chance that she was slowly poisoned by lead throughout her life. There's, her hair loss and teeth falling out and just all sorts of weird, interesting stuff. But that is something, again, like I said, that we want to touch on is this concept that if you're poisoned, you fix it and then that's it. Like that's not how a lot of people are getting poisoned.
hmm
And, even like with water and like the tap water and, the crisis that's still going on in Flint, how insane that people are just ignoring the fact that the Supreme Court in Michigan released all charges from the people to be held accountable for the lead water poisoning of Flint. The blatant lack of accountability is atrocious. As we associate white face makeup with high class society of certain eras, we can't also leave out another sector of society that really loved wearing white face makeup, and that's clowns and mimes, but hard to decide which is creepier, a clown or a mime. So we're going to focus more on clowns. My mom actually brought up this really famous mime to look into. And like I said, this is going to spin off into us looking like more in depth into specific people after I read the thing that I'm going to read, because it's pretty interesting. But when I first started reading about this kind of makeup, my first reaction, was to think of clowns. And as I mentioned, we'll be getting to serial killers soon. And so the first thing that popped in my head was John Wayne Gacy. I also learned in his background that there's some really big lead flags in his background. Get it, instead of red flags, I'm going to say lead flags.
I thought that was a real thing.
No.
It is a real thing now.
But, it's a real thing now. Anyway, so lead is used in paint and cosmetics to pull bright, vibrant colors. And this is also connected to clowns who wore it. And I was thinking maybe that's why clowns are so fucked up and scary. They're just like, they have a psychosis from lead poisoning. But I'll be looking more into John Wayne Gacy when I have time. I don't have time right now. But if anyone happens to know the exact kind of makeup he used when he dressed up to look creepy as hell, I would love to know. But he worked in construction. He had seizures as a kid, and these seizures are associated with lead poisoning. It's all very interesting. Like I said, when I started looking into the Green River Killer.
Oh, I don't know. I know what you're talking about.
But I mean, that he worked in the paint department of an automobile. I
did not know that, but
factory.
I actually just learned about that person, like in his crimes.
Yeah, lots of lead flags to that guy too. So we'll be talking about him eventually. But from an article entitled "The History of Clown White, From Deadly Poison to Mild Makeup," which again, all of our sources are listed under each episode description, quote, "Whitening the human face for comic relief has its roots in ancient Greek theater. Comic characters were portrayed wearing white masks, while tragic heroes were usually cast in black masks. The ancient Romans continued the tradition until sometime after the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome at the beginning of the Dark Ages, when all masks were prohibited by the Catholic Church. Players then began using mineral and plant matter to color their own faces. Among the former, white lead was the favorite way of whitening the players' faces. No one back then really knew about the potential for lead poisoning, which, again, not true, because we know that they've known how toxic lead is for over 2,000 years. But I'm sure a lot of people didn't understand it. But luckily, these players usually dabbed only a bit on for appearance and then immediately wiped it off. So they didn't have it long enough in their bloodstream to enter their bloodstream. But all this changed during the Industrial Revolution in England. First, because the process for making white lead became much simpler. Before then, regular lead bars were steeped in vinegar, which again, I cannot imagine. Oh, wait.
So stinky.
Also, then covered in dung for several weeks. So we already had vinegar, and then you're going to cover it in poop?
Well, for a large part of the world, I mean, yeah, it was really stinky. And dung is a pretty commonly used building material and resource.
I know, but to put it on your face is different to build with. That really just threw me off, because I didn't actually read the poop part till just then. Anyway, so
would you expect any less? Of course, it was vinegar and poop.
Of course. Oh my God. Why would I think anything different?
The history of humanity is just a bunch of people going, "Oh, we could put vinegar and poop in it, right?" How about some lead?
Let's
put some lead and vinegar and poop.
Lead, vinegar, poop. Yeah. Humanity summed up. All right, quote, "White lead was used as a whitewash and a lubricant in factories because it lasted long and it did not smolder like other lubricants. So the English factory owners paid their chemists to come up with a quick and easy way to make white lead paste. And of course they did. Heated and then sprayed with acetic acid. That's hard to say. The lead bars turned white and began flaking without assistance. White lead was now to be found everywhere. Yay! The second change was attributed to one man, and that's the famous English clown, Joseph Grimaldi. And he first pranced the stage with his face completely whitened with a combination of beeswax, paraffin, and white lead. It had a tendency to shrivel up and die, so he found the ways to make it last. And so obviously he's like the clown that everybody looks up to. So other clowns wanted to emulate his look.
So interesting.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the idea of cults and like there's always a leader. There's always like that one person you look up to. no matter what kind of sector of society you're in. And so this was like their, for the person like how to succeed, like check out this guy.
Well, it reminds me of influencers today where they're saying one thing, they're
Yes.
saying, I mean, that's what they're saying, like, oh, you should try this, or you do this, or do this. And it's like, yeah, but you're rich. You actually
Grimaldi
have,
had a
you have a
TikTok
team of, Grimaldi's basically had his own TikTok,
with
and
the bergamot and the
yeah,
rosemary, just added into your leaded paint.
but he didn't tell
Ooh,
anyone about that. He just made it look
that's true.
effortless. He
He
just
made
made it
it
look
look effortless.
effortless, and he had this long-standing fame, and everyone's like,
Yes.
"I want to be like Grimaldi," and they're putting
Because,
on as
yes,
much direct white lead as they possibly can. And it's like, for some reason, it just doesn't look the same. Like they
just
had
keep
the,
putting it on. Just keep lathering it on.
maybe I need to put more on.
Yeah. So he did. He did not reveal the secret ingredient and he took it to his grave with him. So obviously, why would you want anybody? It's the same as we were talking about the Ayn Rand philosophy of like, I'm going to achieve this. Everybody has a right, but no, don't touch what I'm talking. No, you can't do what I'm doing. Just leave me alone. Like, this is mine and not yours. But anyway, so other clowns did try to emulate his white face and began suffering the symptoms of lead poisoning. And as we've mentioned, lead doesn't affect everybody the same way. And the sooner we can figure that out, I think the better off we'll be, because there's clearly something. And like we've talked about it too with certain fruits and vegetables that leach lead more than other fruits and vegetables. There's clearly a link there. So unfortunately, a lot of these people suffered the symptoms, which included confusion, irritability, anemia, joint pain, and in some cases, seizures. And these are the same symptoms that children suffer today when they ingest paint chips from old houses. And obviously, not just by ingesting paint chips, as we've discovered, there's all sorts of fun ways to get lead poisoning. Lead was capricious, troubling some clowns and ignoring others that wore it constantly. So just with anything, like including what we are discussing, there's people that go, oh shit, this is poisonous. I should probably stop using it. And other people like, whatever. It was just these few people. I'm going to still put it on my face. The first white-faced clown in America was George L. Fox. And he began losing coordination in his early 30s. And by the time he was 55, he could barely walk and had to be taken in by his sister until he passed away. But the Hanlon brothers, which was a rowdy family circus that toured the South prior to the Civil War, also wore this white face and never seemed to be troubled by the symptoms of lead poisoning, end quote. I don't think that's saying that they didn't necessarily have the effects of lead poisoning. There's a lot of people that just deal with it. I think we can see that, with like even like somebody who drinks Coca-Cola every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I like my Coca-Cola. So whatever, if it, causes these side effects, I can deal with it. I think it's more of a lot of people just dealing with being poisoned than not having actual effects of being poisoned.
Oh, absolutely.
Quote, perhaps the most tragic victim of white lead poisoning was the Ringling clown Frank Silvers Oakley. After rising to the top of Ringling Brothers Circus, he suddenly developed severe knee problems and had to retire prematurely when he was barely in his 40s. And when he tried to make a comeback several years later, he collapsed in the center of the ring during his first clown sketch and had to be carried out. And the next day, he shot himself with a pistol, end quote. At this point, they know it's poisoning people. Like this is in the 1800s, early 1900s. We've already said how we know lead. They've known about the toxic side effects of lead for 2,000 years. They knew about it in ancient Rome. They knew about it in the 16th century. Yet this is pretty recent and still being used to having these effects. It just boggles my mind. Like we always are talking about how there's always alternatives, and there's clearly an alternative to using this.
Yeah, it seems to be like a mechanism which we're able to compartmentalize this information. It's a serious problem. It's a serious problem for this group of people. It's a serious problem for this group of people that has lasting impacts. And then like that sort of like moves out of the cultural focus, and then some other group is like, oh, this is a serious problem. This is a serious problem for this group of people. This is a serious problem that has lasting impacts. And then we just keep moving the camera lens or something. I don't know what the
Depending on
analogy
who it
is.
affects.
I think it's weird whenever anything is named. I know you're going to talk about this, but like when you have a name for something like Jake
Yeah.
Leg, when you
Well,
like,
yeah, and you brought that up with crap, that
I'm always
specific thing, and I
I'm
can't
always
remember what it was
fascinated when
from.
something gets named because that means there's enough people
Having, yes, yeah.
having it or whatever, and
There's a commonality to it.
they have to and they give him this like
Make
you
a joke
wouldn't
of it.
know what that is if you were in the out group. Like if you walked into some conversation and they're like, oh yeah, Bartholomew and
It was
he's got yeah.
it was leaded gas because remember the House of Butterflies,
Yes.
how they termed it the House of Butterflies and like made light of it, the fact that these people were losing their actual minds and hallucinating, seeing butterflies.
So there were people, it didn't happen to one person. It didn't happen
No,
at one time.
yeah,
In fact, it
it wasn't
happened
this one clown, it wasn't this one factory worker.
where people actually were discussing
The symptom.
this phenomenon, this
Mm-hmm.
symptom. They had to discuss it, so they came up with a name for it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of power when that happens, and then there's a lot of like evidence that this is a thing. But it seems to just have that name as opposed to having that name and then some kind of systemic action.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really go further than passive recognition, which
Pass,
isn't
yeah.
it's not the thing. We didn't call
Mm-hmm.
it. They're not calling it lead poisoning. They're calling it
Mm-hmm.
Jake Leg. They're calling it the House of Butterflies. They're not
Yeah.
saying we're being poisoned by our employer.
Yeah. Laws were obviously passed to remove lead from gasoline when we saw how severe it was, and then following leaded paint. And there's always this shift of like, oh, well, we took care of that, so now we're fine. Well, while these laws were passed for gas and paint, no one thought much about the paint put on American circus clowns. They were still mixing it up and
Mhm.
using mineral oil, beeswax, and lead. And they still were suffering the effects of chronic lead poisoning. And like you just said, in circus lingo, it was called Jake Leg. And you know, we've talked about the fact that lead mimics calcium; it replaces calcium in your body. And so a lot of these joint issues, I'm sure, can just have a quick connection to that. It wasn't until the 1920s when a Polish immigrant named Max Factor, which we all know Max Factor, you know, makeup?
Maybelline?
No, Max Factor.
It's just called Max Factor. It's not from Mabel. I don't know.
Yeah, Max Factor.
That's the okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I probably have a little bit more knowledge of this than you do, but yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, no, Max Factor is an actual makeup company.
I actually, yeah. What I was trying to say is, I didn't realize it was its own company. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
like from Maybelline. Like, is that from Maybelline? Like, but
Yeah, no. So Max
nope, you
Factor
won't know
is
that.
a competitor of Maybelline. I could
That's
not think of that word. Holy shit.
and
Anyways,
also the best stage name in history.
he settled in Hollywood to make wigs and cosmetics, and he came out with a quote, safety clown white in 1920, that clowns were finally able to be rescued from chronic lead poisoning. So it went on for this long
Mm-hmm.
before somebody was like, hey, I can make some makeup without lead in it.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed this before. Like, there's no thread. I mean, we would want there to be this historical golden thread from Roman aqueducts to clown makeup in the 20s, but like
Mhm.
there isn't a single discourse, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah.
But we have that now, or we
Yeah.
could have that now. And what I think we're seeing is this poison spreads when these
Mhm.
conversations are diffused, and he's finally like saying like, nope, this has been a problem, which I'm presenting a solution for. I wonder if people really understood like this was a big problem or the historical impact of how this is a huge problem.
When you make a joke of it, you know, and oh, you
Mhm.
got the Jake leg, ha ha, like oh, you're being poisoned, slowly being poisoned to death and losing your ability to function as a human, all because you want to look a certain way, which I guess, God, that's still happening. But this guy realized that there's something that could be done about it. And so, quote, Max worked late into the night experimenting with oxide of titanium until he developed a formula that gave the exact same white sheen that white lead did. And he began taking his brand of clown makeup down to the circus, wherever there would be a show in Los Angeles, and gave out free samples. Like, this guy's a fucking genius also.
Completely.
I can't tell you the last time I bought makeup, but it makes me want to look and see like what Max Factor's makeup has now. Are they still on that wave of like having safe alternatives for people? Probably not, but we'll see. And anyway, so quote, it didn't take white-faced clowns long before they noticed how much better they felt when they were using Factor's clown white instead of their own concoctions. And by 1927, every American, quote, Joey, which I'm assuming that's a term for being a clown, I don't fucking know, was using the Max Factor brand. Quote, Jake Leg disappeared from the circus, never to return. How weird. Isn't that weird how you remove lead and then their symptoms went away? And today, clown white comes in many different brands, and the main whitening agent is neither white lead nor oxide or titanium, but zinc oxide, which is the same thing we use on bee stings and sunburns, end quote. So the evolution came from one person going, hey, man, we don't need to be poisoning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the way he did it, that grassroots, like, hey, get a free sample. Holy shit, I can walk.
Yeah.
I'm not, having seizures or all these other effects. So apparently 1927, that, that's where the shift happened. And just how ironic that shift happened when leaded gas was coming in to poison everybody. Like,
right.
Think of that timeline.
So there's this improvement in one area, but it
plummeted and made it a million. It was a certain sector, like you put on that makeup and you're getting poisoned, or somebody licks your face, or you know what I mean?
We're still in the current. We can't, like, even though there's this huge stride, we're still in the current. We can't get out of it.
Yeah, but how interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this concept of, well, whatever, like, it's just something I have to deal with. Like, all these people just continuing to slather their faces with lead and like, well, can't walk, but it is what it is. I hope that gives people some insight, though, into how easy it is for us to do that, to fall into those traps. We do all the fucking time. All falls back to who's not being held accountable, who's saying it's okay for us to be sold poison. If it wasn't for Max Factor, how much longer were clowns going to be using that makeup? Who knows? This happened in 1927. So, lead was taken out of makeup, right? I think you always know where I'm going with these. Because when I Googled, quote, when was lead taken out of makeup, end quote, the FDA website was, of course, the first to pop up. And their page link starts with, quote, questions sometimes arise about the presence of lead in cosmetics. Lead is an element that occurs naturally in the earth. Trace amounts of lead occur in the foods we eat and the water we drink. The FDA works hard to limit consumers' exposure to lead in all FDA-regulated products, including cosmetics, end quote. Let's say if Mama had this clay face mask and this person's selling, and she put out this big warning of like the insane amount of lead that's in it. And they tried using that narrative of like, well, lead's a natural occurring element, blah, blah, blah. Well, her little meter thing brings up the amounts of lead in. You can get it on Amazon. It's sold in the US, clearly not regulated. And that's the other thing is like what the FDA regulates isn't everything. So you have this misconception that like they're overseeing everything. Well, they don't actually oversee. It's only the things they regulate. And even those things, there's loopholes, as we saw with the canned goods, the baby food. Anyways, the FDA website goes on to say, quote, FDA regulates cosmetics under a law passed by Congress, which is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This law does not require cosmetic products or most ingredients to have FDA approval before they go on the market.
What?
So the only exception is for color additives used in cosmetics, but cosmetics must be safe when consumers use them, following the directions on the label or in the customary or expected way, end quote. And what that made me think of is how you looked up those disclaimers. Remember when you were looking up recalls and you figured out how to get away with like just putting a certain disclaimer on?
Oh, yeah.
You looked up certain things that are in your product, you put the age group that you're trying to, or they tell you what age group you can't use that in.
Okay.
Like they give you the guides of like how to put this ingredient in your product, not intended for children or only for this age group. They gave you the guideline to get away with it.
Right. It was like from 6 months old to 2 years.
12 and older.
Yeah.
If it says 12 and older, there's probably something really bad in it.
That assumes that it's like safe for them and only they would be using it, but no older sibling has ever had a toy that a younger sibling has wanted to play with, right? Like that.
And it's your responsibility as the parent to be watching that instead of just not selling poison. But what I love is, so they talk about how they regulate cosmetics, but then also go literally in the next sentence that this law does not require cosmetic products or most ingredients to have FDA approval.
We regulate cosmetics, except for the fact that we don't regulate cosmetics. We're really more in the color industry.
I don't. We have this false concept of things. We're led to believe this, though. I don't want people thinking like that they should have known, but like you're led to believe that these things are being done or regulated, and like you want to live in your safe little bubble. But at the end of the day, we gotta just admit to the fact that corporations run our country. We, the people, do not run our country.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Just in general, like it's been sold. Our government and our country has been sold to corporations.
Yes, and we really need to wake up to that because it's just the new wave of manifest destiny. There's the corporations are that new wave, and we're going to talk about this, like I said, but that Ayn Rand narrative of is just corporate manifest destiny. If we don't actually regulate these things, we as the people are really fucked. And so we really got to start paying attention to where the money's coming from for certain political people and call people out when you see where that money is coming from. Human bodies and bodily autonomy is okay to be regulated, but corporations getting regulated is considered bad. We really need to draw attention to that, and people really need to see the big picture on that.
And you've said this a lot, and I'm just going to restate it, that this by itself is not the primary issue for change, but just that notion of like, there's only like one issue, or like we have to focus on this one thing. Like the real revolutionary change is when we're able to look at all of this stuff holistically. We're in a system that prioritizes our poisoning over our thriving. It's dollars over the actual human lives that
you just made me pop in my head too, like when essential oils and like because you brought up holistic, and when these first were making, like, I want to say a comeback because like they've always been used, obviously, but that new wave of it and how many corporations were like bashing it and like bashing these small businesses coming out with these products that like balms and whatever, like even myself included, like that had essential oils and organic ingredients, and how even the FDA used the scare tactics of it. And like, it's like, yeah, you have to be knowledgeable about what you're putting out and make sure, it's used by a certain date. But like, what's the problem in, wanting something to be fresh? Like, you don't want something that lasts 10 years. What the fuck's in there that makes it last 10 years? But the thing is, these companies now are doing that. So the same companies who were trashing it, if you go into Walgreens, everything has like made with lavender essential oil and organic rosemary essential. The hypocrisy of it. Like, it's just, well, we just have to shit talk this until we can get the product out ourselves.
Yeah.
It's so sick. Unrelated to that, on the FDA website, this is unrelated to makeup, but still in the same realm, and it's fled in the use of hair dye. And since I quite literally just dyed my hair bright red yesterday, I felt the need to share this because it's like, oh, I did not know that lead was in hair dye. Talk about something seeping into your skin.
Right.
And into your brain. But, quote, in 1980, lead acetate, which again, we've talked about lead acetate because that's lead sugar.
Right. Okay.
It's like the Splenda of lead. But anyways, lead acetate was permanently listed as safe in 1980 for use as a color additive in cosmetics intended for coloring hair or the scalp, which they term, quote, progressive hair dyes. However, in 2017, the FDA received a color additive petition requesting that the FDA repeal the lead acetate listing due for safety concerns. After reviewing the data, the FDA concluded that these data no longer support the safe use of lead acetate as a color additive in hair dyes. This amendment was based on FDA's determination that the available information no longer demonstrates a, quote, reasonable certainty of no harm, the safety standard for a color additive used in cosmetics, rather than a determination that lead acetate in cosmetics intended for coloring the hair on the scalp has been shown to cause harm under these conditions. On October 30th, 2018, the FDA published a final rule to amend the color additive regulations to no longer provide for the use of lead acetate as a color additive. On April 1st, 2019, the final rule was stayed because the agency received objections to its decision and a public hearing was requested within an allowable timeframe. Gee, I wonder who did that. The agency has reviewed the objections and has determined that they did not raise issues of material fact. As of January 6, 2022, lead acetate is no longer allowed as a color additive in progressive hair dyes. We intend to exercise enforcement discretion for 12 months following the effective date to provide industry with the opportunity to deplete their current stock and reformulate hair dye products containing lead acetate, end quote.
They're always about the.
It's all about protecting corporations. It's so insane.
Well, I can't quit drinking now. I just bought a whole tub of liquor. I can't quit smoking now. I just bought 2 cartons of cigarettes. I gotta get my money out of them.
Hair dye full of lead. I gotta sell it.
I gotta sell it.
God.
I can't be out that product.
January 6, 2022. Also, I didn't even make the connection to the January 6th events, but I'm just saying, like, the fact that it's 2022.
Yeah.
So the hair dye that I have probably has fucking lead in it, and I had no idea. And like I said, people need to realize, like, this concept that they try and mislead you, that, like, the idea of this poisoning is like this instant boom. The effects aren't always seen right away. Sometimes they are, and you don't even realize it because the side effects are so wide ranging. And if you're somebody who, dyes your hair every once in a while, might not affect you as bad, but there's people that dye their hair all the fucking time. Granted, hair dye itself, probably not the greatest idea, but it's just the concept of, like, they deemed it in 1980. And the only reason they deemed it not safe was because an outside group is the same with the baby food in the tin cans. Yeah. They're not regulating shit. They're regulating what corporations want them to regulate, is what it seems like, doesn't it? Because it's not till outside groups go, hey, this actually isn't safe, that they even consider it, even though we know how toxic lead is and we've known for 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's flowers in the attic. I'm telling you, I've mentioned this before. They keep poisoning the cookies. It's just a little bit at a time, It keeps us sick.
I just don't understand, like, how they even deemed it safe in the first place. Obviously, that's something we need to get into more. And, like, we're bringing up just how we have this notion of, like, okay, we ban leaded gas or we ban lead. It's everywhere. And the scary, like I said, the scary thing with these regulations being lifted, the people who should be held accountable, not being held accountable.
Right.
We, the people that we keep obviously tactically being divided. All of this it's really sad. We, the consumer versus the corporation. We talked about in our not last episode, but last episode recorded, our relationship with corporations. It's toxic. It's abusive. And we need to get out of it. I don't know. I guess maybe we need to start looking at that tactic too.
Oh, for sure.
But like I said, at the end of the day, our power is in where we put our money.
Someone much smarter than me on TikTok pointed out the smartest people at the CDC said when you get COVID, you need to stay away from work for 10 days. Like we crunched the numbers. This is what we've come up with, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know how they determine that, but they come up with this is the safe amount of time. You don't always know the exact date that you might have
exactly.
had symptoms begin
Hmm.
or that you might have actually. So they came up with this 10 days.
Yeah.
And then corporations got together and they
We're like,
said, look, we cannot afford it. You
yeah.
cannot have people out of work this long. And they pressured the government. This is another one of these things where it's like, remember when
Yep.
this happened?
Yeah.
They pressured the government
Yep.
to say, actually, 5 days is just fine. It's just
We're
fine.
not going to lose money on paying people to be out of work.
And we're not going to lose productivity on people
Yeah.
being out of work.
Yeah.
And so, what this TikToker pointed out is apparently 10 days is when they start really sweating. So, what you're saying with Finland and
Oh, Iceland.
with Iceland and their incredible history with striking, apparently, if we can afford to get more people to not go to work for a couple weeks, a
Yeah.
month,
Yeah.
this whole thing would collapse. I bet the filibuster would look pretty enticing after about 13 days.
Yeah. I didn't bring it up in the episode, but Poland, before we
Mm-hmm.
started recording, Poland is dealing with their own issues right now with the overthrow from the political right and what's happening there, and how Biden now has said that there's a permanent presence of military in Poland. But then also in the same week, making a behind closed doors deal with McConnell to appoint a lifelong justice in Kentucky that's anti-abortion, anti-Roe versus Wade, when they're already scary leaning that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just all just a bunch of hooey. Power is in what we consume, and that's what we ingest, what we watch, what we listen to. And so I'm just going to plea again. I know people do it all the time. George Carlin always brought it up. Bill Hicks always brought it up. Great comedians to listen to right now during this time. But that is where we have our power. And we actually have to start using our power to disrupt it. Otherwise, they got us in their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty fucked up. And if, again, this is not one side of an issue, it's on both sides. The fact that they allow stock trading, that there's no salary cap, the $40,000 a year in new furniture allotted to senators. I mean, it's all just the fact that a senator who was caught trying to give fake elector count votes to the vice president. I still see his stupid fucking ads on TV because he's still allowed to run for re-election. Ron Johnson. It's insane. And it's insane on all sides of it. And we just got to wake up, people. So thank you for tuning in. I'm not even going to bother saying what we're going to talk next week because I'm constantly, the news is just getting way too chaotic. The news is just too chaotic for me to say this is what we're going to talk about next week because I have no fucking clue what's going to happen tomorrow.
Spoiler alert, it may or may not be adjacent to lead.
Well, it'll always be adjacent to lead because no matter what, there's always a connection. Because at the end of everything we're talking about, it's corporations running the show.
Yeah.
Lead is cheap, lead is malleable, it lasts long, and that's all that matters to these corporations, not the side effects.
Again, someone smarter than I am, they had this idea that what Trump has done is accelerated a conflict, a fundamental conflict between the nation state and corporate interest, the corporate state. We were on track to this melding of corporatocracies where we pay to live under the corporate state and like by 2050 or something like that. And everything we do is just to promote the machine of corporate interest. But I think what's really unfortunate, and all of our conversations are sort of geared in this discussion, is like we don't want the corporate state to win, but that nation state wasn't really working. It's not like we choose a victor. It's we actually have to break out of this whole thing. We can't let the one side really win. That's really frightening. But the nation state is it can't meet our real human needs.
I think we gotta take a look at Denmark.
Why not? Why wouldn't we? Is it because we can't afford it? Is America poor?
are we actually poor?
Are we
Do we
actually
just
the
keep
poor?
borrowing money, like, and filing bankruptcy and then start?
I want to know, can I just like embarrass America into can I mean girl America
Shame?
into acting appropriately? Like, can you not afford this? Like,
Yeah, really. Can you shame?
oh,
No.
healthcare?
But that's the thing.
Oh,
You
that's too
can't
bad. You can't afford universal healthcare.
you
Oh,
can't shame them into that because they use the Fountainhead
right,
narrative.
right.
So you can't shame them.
They go back to that little bubble where it's like, yeah, it'd be
But
funny
like
if
I
we
was gonna
could.
say, it's always those people that, like, when you bring up Denmark and you bring up these other quote socialist
Hmm.
countries, or even Canada. And like, I mean, I know people very close to me who have this automatic knee-jerk reaction of it's not that great. Canada's healthcare is shit and you have to wait and blah, blah, blah. But as like John Oliver brought up, the data they use for saying how long you have to wait isn't connected to like going in and getting checked out for the cold. It's like to get a knee replacement, you have to wait 3 months. You know what I mean? It's this idea of like taking stuff to manipulate it to make people think, no, this isn't that good when it really actually is. And I see it all the time when people talk shit about Denmark and their high taxes. The people over there aren't complaining about the high taxes because they have a great fucking life because of their high taxes and they get paid more. You just got to look at where the information's coming from. And then, like, when you get that information, actually look at it. And then when you talk to the people that affected by this information instead of the Koch brothers telling you that this is a shit country or that they're, oh, you don't want them to pay. You don't want to pay these taxes. It's like, no, they, the corporation, don't want to pay
We
these
already
taxes.
pay these taxes.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
already pay these fucking taxes, people. We're trying to get the corporations to pay those taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, the billions of dollars. Billions.
I mean, who would buy a hammer the way that we buy health insurance? You got to pay for it. We're going to pay for it monthly, and then when you use your hammer, you have to pay us again.
Pay
And
again.
once you pay up to this amount, then we're going to cover 80% of the rest of the thing that you have to spend on this use of this hammer.
Yeah.
If you use it the way we want you to use it.
Yeah, only if you use it the way we want you to use it.
And we're going to make that really ambiguous. Like,
yeah.
But if you don't use it the way we want, then you got to pay full 100%. Then, yeah.
Yeah. And
So
these
good
are
luck.
the same people who are bringing up the scare tactics of communism and socialism dictating your life.
It's insane.
Congratulations.
Insane.
Well, anyways, thanks
Yeah.
for tuning in, everybody. And like I said, not sure what next week's going to be about, but, you know, I'm sure it'll piss us all off. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to United States of Lead, hosted by Andrea Elizabeth and Paul Kramer. Want to know more about this subject? Consider making a donation on Patreon, where you can unlock extended video episodes and bonus content like deep dives and exclusive interviews. Just a quick disclaimer, Andrea and Paul are not experts in lead poisoning. We do ask that you check our sources and read up a little bit more on your own. Thanks again for listening.